Hello, void and all who inhabit it. It's me, and I'm once again recording in the middle of the night. So, I watched Bridgerton quite soon based on how long it typically takes me to consume new media, actually. I wasn't going to watch the show at all because, one, I'm not the biggest fan of historical romance fiction, and two, I'm still very bitter about Still Star-Crossed. If you've never heard of Still Star-Crossed, you are unfortunately in the majority. I'm going to link a video that goes in depth about the history of that show and how ABC failed it. But very briefly, Still Star-Crossed was a period drama based off the novel of the same name about the town of Verona after the events of Romeo and Juliet. It's super difficult to find online now, but it's absolutely worth a watch if you can find it. Other than being a Shondaland produced series based off a historical romance fiction, this show had a fake relationship trope, an overly involved monarch, a gratuitous tight-lacing scene, and diverse casting. Sounds kind of familiar. So yeah, I was a little tight to see them trying this again, however, with a main character cap of being no darker than a Fenty 350. But, unlike Still Star-Crossed, Bridgerton quickly pulled interest with its lineup. More importantly, between social media hype and interviews with the showrunner, Bridgerton has launched more conversations about representation, including this one. I perceive that when marginalized communities are asking for more representation, it is that we are looking for characters who are more than a token, a cautionary tale, or a magical mentor. We want strong characters who are integrated into different stories. I think a lot of people, especially those outside of the marginalized communities looking for more, see representation as a problem that can be solved just by adding in one or two people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about representation, when it does work and when it doesn't. To me, there are two main ways we see representation have an impact: behind the scenes in the writing and on the screen with the casting. With writing, diversity in action can be broken into two buckets. There are storylines that are unique to a population and can best be told by own voices, and there's diversity of writers' rooms so that shows are writing stories with characters and people of color in mind. The second bucket can result in things like a scene where your main black character is getting a sew-in, or an episode set in Korea where the Korean people actually speak Korean. But this is also just being cognizant of the optics and dynamics at play between characters of different races, especially if that is an aspect of the plot. Irrespective of the writing, however, it is often the existence of a diverse cast of characters that catches the most attention. Again, let's break this into two options. We have the symbolic characters. These are a few key characters that get played by people of color: a queen, a best friend, the main character, and literally nobody else. It's enough to draw attention, maybe even vitriol, but this remaster token is here to stay. Maybe. Symbolic characters are also where we see our most shallow ideas of improvement. When my boss was describing Bridgerton to me and why I should watch it, she said something like, "It's dope, they have two black women running all the shit." And no shade to my boss, but this is exactly the issue with symbolic representation. This idea that because this one character exists, now suddenly we should all be happy with the story we're being presented. And I think a lot of us approach main characters of color or key characters of color with excitement, but symbolic characters rely on that awe as the foundation of that character's existence and their story.
Isn't it amazing that the queen is black?
Sure, but is she written well? Is she who I'm supposed to be relating to? Does she have a rounded story? Is she supposed to? Often the characters who fulfill that for us, the characters who are rounded, who we are supposed to relate to, they aren't the people who randomly get cast as people of color. But when they are, those characters fill the bucket of being a sprinkle. These are still a small amount of characters. You can't have too many, okay, or you'll lose relatability. But these characters are rounded with detailed storylines who happen to be played by people of color. Color-conscious casting, say that 3 times fast, fits into this bucket, but not all characters who are sprinkles are a result of color-conscious casting. Often, the difference between the two categories of being a symbolic character or a sprinkle character, especially in shows where this character is one of the few, the proud, the brown, is in depth of storyline and character development. Shipping is still a pretty good litmus test for a character being symbolic or rounded. More and more, the conversations around shipping aren't about the specific ships, but about which characters are treated as worthy of care, attention, and plot time. Another major difference between a symbolic character and a sprinkle character is how many people of color exist around them. As a note, race-bent characters can start in one category and end up in the other. It's also worth noting that oftentimes characters of color, be they race-bent or not, who are intended to be a major character can have their stories diminished or be completely written off despite starting off strong. Eve from Killing Eve is an example of a sprinkle character for whom much of the focus of the show and the fans has pivoted away from her and focused mainly on Villanelle, the white co-lead. I think we see what's going on with Eve quite a lot, actually. A show, at least a pilot, has to be written and pitched before characters are cast, meaning that at least the first season version of a character is written before it's confirmed what they'll look like. And the writers may have an idea, especially if the show is adapting a novel, but I think once the actor of color is cast, the implicit biases start coming and they don't stop coming. How the character is perceived changes once they are played by a person of color. And one way that is unfortunately evident is in the way their storylines or development may begin to erode. The pre-implicit bias erosion of a character, though, chef's kiss. That's what draws viewers in, honestly. The chance to see a person of color in a role we don't often get to see, and hopefully, maybe, at least for a season, get to see them written well. But to me, the strength of the story is more important than the attention built by casting decisions. Both Bridgerton and Still Star-Crossed are adaptations of books written by white women, and unlike a movie like The Handmaiden, which places its story in an entirely new environment, these shows cast people of color in the story as it is, for the most part. Which brings us to another fork in the road of representation. If this isn't an own voices story, is there a reason why my lily white emotional support fantasy now has people of color in it? Option number 1 is no. This is the Brandy Cinderella version of storytelling. These people exist as they are. Does it make sense that this Filipino man is the son of a black woman and a white man? No. But who's asking? And why? Because we need to get them the fuck out of here. Sometimes not acknowledging that race is a thing can be to the detriment of a character, like being put in situations that you should maybe acknowledge race in. But for the most part, race just doesn't come up. Option number 2 is yes, there is a reason. Behind this door, we often find responses to the argument of historical accuracy. Despite this being a fictional story about mostly fictional people, we will include a tinge of realism by providing some reason as to why the Negras are in positions of power. 2 things are really annoying about this. 1, white people never have to explain why almost every positive depiction of New York City or DC is entirely white. They never make the stretch in Hallmark movies set in Midwestern mid-sized towns to include a noticeably sized immigrant refugee population. There is never an explanation as to why ancient Romans all have British accents. So many white creatives in their world building in their character construction, in their plot development, never want to consider anyone who isn't white. But the inaccuracy of a major metropolitan city having no people of color even in the background is not seen as damning enough to yeet a show into non-existence, the way that having a black person be anything but a servant before 1960, if they are even allowed to exist, is a big issue. Historical accuracy is a dog whistle argument that isn't actually concerned with what it claims, and more often, opportunities for escapism and enjoyable fiction are taken from audiences of color in favor of telling an accurate story. 2, now that the story has acknowledged that race exists, they need to handle that. If people of color just exist in your story and the power dynamic is not at all like reality, you have a much smaller task of just not writing your characters of color like shit. But when you introduce power dynamics and an idea of race that exists very similarly to reality, you are setting up a layer that exists both for viewers and within the narrative. You've now opened the door to not just questioning decisions based in the plot, but to questioning deeper at how the treatment of characters is reflective of our own society. With Bridgerton, this has led to a lot of criticism about the show's handling of race, which would happen anyway, but is now probably worse because the writers have set an expectation of awareness within the story. It's not just we as creatives in 2021 have to be cognizant of how we are writing people of color, but now race is an element actively impacting the plot. Given that they're adapting a book that was written with only straight cisgendered white people in mind, I wonder how much wiggle room they really have to add in additional subplots that look to rectify diversity issues. If the last scene with Anthony was not clear enough, Lady Whistledown's announcement suggests that the next season will be covering the next book. It's then likely that every season will follow the next Bridgerton child's love story, meaning every major love story of this show will be a heterosexual pairing with at least one white person in it. And we've already been introduced to the people who will make up 2 of these future couplings, and they're all white. A lot of people want Kate, who is Anthony's love interest, to be a woman of color and specifically a dark-skinned black woman, which would be an improvement, but is not a huge step forward, especially for Shondaland Interracial Relationship Haven Productions, if all the other very few characters of color around them are relegated to being shallow archetypes or set dressing. Honestly, I thought they would be more likely to make Benedict's love interest, who was a servant / is basically Cinderella, a black woman first. And while part of that is my cynicism speaking, that thought is also fueled by the ways that we do see dark-skinned black women pop up in majority white stories. You may get to exist, but it's with some large caveats, which is why I think characters like the Queen and Lady Danbury were so appealing, because they didn't seem restricted. While I'm glad Adjoa Andoh was able to get past the Netflix mandated paper bag test for all black women characters, the push for Kate to be a dark-skinned black woman is because the first season has shown that it is only white and light-skinned people who are worth getting any speaking roles or storylines. Would making Kate dark-skinned fix that? Not entirely, and certainly not if she's the only one. I started my breakdown of representation with separating story from character to emphasize that it is not enough to just plop a person of color into one spot and be done with it. The roles these characters have, the stories they are a part of, the other people around them should also be factored into the impact of their existence. Simon's father's obsession with keeping the Hastings line alive hits different when you make him black. Marina's story, her dynamic with Penelope, is changed by making her black. Will's story as a boxer, Genevieve's position in society as a seamstress and her relationship with Benedict, Lady Granville's relationship with her husband and her position in society are all affected by making those characters people of color. Kate's story would be changed by making her black, and the writers should flex to handle that. especially because the show wanted to add a reason as to why there are gentry and nobility who are people of color. The show acknowledged that race exists. So what are they going to do about it? Truly do something about it, because one pithy scene about love conquering all is not sufficient. Bridgerton has been described as a depiction of post-racial Britain, but if that's just going to mean that gatekeeping was turned down from a 10 to an 8, that now you can see 4 people of color instead of 2, but still only one of them will get any care or attention, and anyone who speaks for longer than 5 minutes has to be lighter than my palm, is the casting really all that impactful? I've seen a lot more people talk about representation being a more personal experience. You decide which narratives and characters to resonate with. And I halfway agree. I'm sure there are plenty of people who watched Bridgerton and found it to be more than enough. But part of me is worried about a slippery slope backwards, with the rationale being,
well, it's fine that this show is 98% white or cis or straight, because there are some marginalized viewers that can personally relate with some part of it.
No one show is going to be all of the things for all of the people, but I'm not asking for that. I'm simply asking for you to do better. And I think it's totally reasonable that we ask for more. When a show is lauded for its diversity, when it is marketed for its diversity, and especially a Shondaland show, which are known to have strong black female leads, so everyone kind of disregards all the other shit in the wings, we should push for more. But that push has to be both for changes in the casting and the actual story. Is it good that Simon, Lady Danbury, and the Queen are all black? Sure. Is it important that the story created entirely new characters of color? Absolutely. But sculpting meaningful stories looks different when you are casting pre-existing characters as people of color versus when you are crafting something from scratch. And when either is done poorly, the result is the same, a diversity that feels more performative than representative. If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. This was quite a short one. Have you watched Bridgerton? I didn't go over a lot of the issues with the representation that the show does have, and I will link a better video on that below because there is a lot to unpack, girl. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not a fan of historical romances at all. However, Regé Jean, whom the director of the show in which he plays the main love interest, she didn't see him as a sex symbol, by the way. Like, you want to talk about representation, how did her interpretation of him impact the way she directed the scenes? Anyway, he's fine as fuck. So I watched the show for him, and it was a labor of love, child. But you know what they say, weeping may endure for a night, but joy... Let me stop before I get smited. Until next time, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.